Warsaw. And yep, sorry. The topic of today's workshop is sort of methodological challenges, obstacles, questions that we pose ourselves when we do research in disability studies. And the idea for this workshop, I think the first time we had it, both Magda and I, was last year when Kasia Ojrzyńska had her talk and workshop in Kraków, actually. I think it was October 2022. Kasia had a lecture, a talk on disability and Holocaust. And then she had a conversation with Kenny Fries where they talked how to do research on history, how to do research about people with disabilities who lost lives during World War II, who's the researcher here. And all of these questions sort of led us to think more deeply about how to do disability studies when we are all representing disciplines which are already, traditionally embedded into academia. Is there any tension between given that there are some traditional ways of doing this research, of asking questions, of methodologies? What is the new that disability studies sort of brings into the table? Are there any conversations that we can join, or how do we actually rather maybe create conversations? And does disability studies in some sense destabilize the fields that we are already working in, or is this the other way around? Of course, these are just some exemplary questions that we were thinking. And today's workshop will not, of course, answer all of our ideas, questions, and maybe challenges, but rather we think of it as some sort of inauguration or a beginning and sustained, conversation, reflection on doing disability studies and methodology, especially in the context of Eastern Europe, which is, Eastern European disability studies still very much emerging. So it's a great time to think about those things. So we decided to invite four people who represent different disciplines and work in different geographical regions too. And we have four speakers, which I will introduce briefly in a second. Each of them will speak for around 5 minutes tops. Because since it is a workshop, we would like it to be more interactive, and we would like you to join in and share your own experiences, your own questions. You work in different fields at different universities and in different geographical so it might be a very interesting conversation. But first, we will listen to the four speakers, and they will speak in alphabetical order. So first, we will hear from Marcin Stasiak, who's an assistant professor at Institute of History at the Jagiellonian University in Kraków, Poland. He's a historian. He's mostly working in the fields of social history of medicine, oral history, history of disability, and recently history of work. And in 2021, he published a really, I think, important and interesting book, Polio in Poland, 1945-1989, Study of the History of Disability. And this book was published in Polish. Then we will hear from Dilmurad Yusupov, who works at the Public Association of Disabled People of Tashkent City. And here I'm not sure how to pronounce the name, SHAROIT Plus. It is an independent people's organization founded by disabled people for disabled people in Tashkent in 2016. Then we will move on to Ania Zaremba-Kosovych, who has a PhD in sociology, and she's a research fellow in the Department of Social Anthropology at the National Academy of Sciences of Ukraine. She also works at the NGO Fight for Right, and she's a co-author of a book which has a really beautiful title, History is Not Without Us, The Formation of the Movement for the Rights of People with Disabilities in Ukraine. And last but not least, we will hear from Magda Zdrodowska, who's an associate professor at the Jagiellonian University in Kraków. She works at the intersection of film and media studies, history of technology, and deaf and disability studies. And she's the chair of this international research network. So these are our speakers, and then we hope to hear from many of you, or hopefully all of you. So let's start with Marcin. If you can share your main methodological question or challenge in 5 minutes? I know it's very difficult, but as I said, it's just the beginning of a conversation.
Marcin, you have
yes.
unmuted.
Yes. Okay, yeah, okay. So time starts. Natalia, first of all, thank you very much for inviting me to this conversation. Just a few remarks from my fieldwork, I believe. In my brief talk, I will mainly refer to this research you just described. And I would like to focus specifically on the challenges that oral history and personal accounts evokes in the analysis of and creating historical narratives of disability, but also beyond. So I strongly believe in the sense of using personal accounts in approaching not only history of disability, but also history in general, and doing so-called history from below. And yeah, I interviewed a total of 25 people, so-called polio survivors, and interviews became an important structural element for me in the writing my story, let's say, his story. Importantly, however, they were not only the only source. At the same time, I use, a bunch of other sources, archival ones, sociological reports and research and something like that. But the recorded testimonies were intended to be let's say, a vehicle to approach collective and individual experiences of disability in post-war Poland, socialist or communist Poland. So I believe that the fundamental challenge with this kind of research is time, and a disability combined with oral history provide a challenge for understanding time in history from the other side, especially in Eastern European historiography. So I understand this big issue of time in two ways: a time now, actuality, and historical past temporality. And first challenge. So this logic of a counter: intimacy, trust, and expectations. So I met my interviewees and asked them to let me into their homes, into their private spaces. And secondly, I'm a guest of their time. So the here and now, and above all, the remembered time. I ask them to access their remembered past. So creating a situation of intimacy is, on the one hand, a great opportunity and advantage, on the other, a burden, often realized only after time, unfortunately. So this conversation in oral history means the coexistence of three domains. So first, questions, research objectives, and so on. In history, often linked to the desire to reconstruct and explain the past. And the demands of a professional audience in the field, in this case, a history. Secondly, the expectations of the interviewee, that is the unspoken need, or sometimes spoken, to be their declared ally, or at least take their side. And thirdly, the researcher's personal attitude towards the interviewee, most often sympathy, to be honest, or some kind of interpersonal loyalty, which certainly influences the analysis of the interview. And there's second challenge. So temporality of the stories. So a distinctive feature of oral history at all is a kind of atemporality. So this is, of course, an effect of how human memory works. We remember selectivity. It's basics, yeah. We mix up dates, sequences of events, and so on and so forth. So for researchers in the field of memory studies, for example, this is not a problem. In fact, it's an advantage. But however, when we try to create a historical narrative of the past using personal oral accounts, which was my point, and it is still, it becomes a challenge. And which is even more important, and this is a two-way challenge, challenging research, but also a challenging discipline is a timeline of story. This is that the timeline of a storytelling does not match the timeline of a document, the meta narrative of the institution, but what is crucial and more important, it doesn't fit a framing provided by historiography, which is simply still dominated, especially in Eastern European contexts, I believe, by either political events or at least great social entities. So while doing such research, we must decide on a single time axis, a dominant one. Referring to an individual life cycle chronology helped me to enter into so important bottom-up perspective and individual experience, but it also implied, to find the chronological anchors not derived from the political history or social even history for the narrative, for my narrative, my story, my book. Here, the chronology of illness and impairment was frequently helpful, this bodily condition, but it also had its price and possible third challenge. So for the potential to easily slip from an inquiry of disability to a focus on, brute physical corporality, which of course it is important in itself, but still it's a problem. And just to sum up this short story, it's quite a weird thing, but in fact you can put it into a time frame as an organizing element. Thank you.
Much. This was so rich and perfect timing. We will of course discuss all of this later. Now we will hear all the speakers. So Anya, that would no. Now it's Dilmurad. Sorry. Yeah.
Hi everyone. Can you hear me? Sorry.
Yes.
Sorry. Just a moment. Some issues here. I prepared some slides to share, if that's possible, just to be very precise with my 5 minutes. Can I share? I can share them, I think. Yeah. Just a moment.
Can you maybe Dilmurad needs to be enabled to share the screen?
Excuse me, he should be the co-host, that he would be
exactly
able.
Yeah, or it's enough to enable the participants, but I can't do it either. So the person who's the host needs to.
I think Monica, you have the power.
Yes, we all with you and with Isa, and I try to do this. Sorry.
Okay.
Apologies, there were some issues with my computer.
It totally works. We can see everything.
Yeah, thank you. So the question was, what methodological challenges do I encounter in my research with disabled people in Uzbekistan? And this is a photo of my fieldwork in Tashkent. It was in 2019, before the pandemic. So we managed to do this kind of interesting stuff on using participatory video with persons with physical disabilities in Tashkent. And my research was basically on using participatory action research as a main kind of methodology. And it was very challenging. The first challenge that I still encounter is, who am I in this with disabled people? Because, and there's a study, a very interesting one by action researchers, Mary Bryden Miller and Alfredo Ortiz, they talk about like 500 heads of the action researcher. And so who am I a researcher who's, or am I an activist? Am I a journalist? Am I an ally, or am I a coffee maker? I don't know, a tea maker. Am I a friend or a co-worker? Am I a manager? Because eventually I ended up working with an NGO, the Organization of Disabled People in Tashkent, which we co-founded with our colleagues. And this is the photo of me and trying to find myself in this, who am I? So, and it's really challenging to wear different hats at the same time. So, and changing them all the time. And it's also about your positionality as a non-disabled researcher. And this was another challenge of my challenge of, so I'm a non-disabled, mainly privileged person coming to do this research with people who are facing many problems because of the barriers they face in the society and the attitudinal barriers. So do I have this legitimate right to write about them and to represent them? Or so it's all about me, and I'm still answering to this question because it's very challenging. And one of my friends, he was very open with me. He said, so you have become a disability expert and everyone is now approaching you, asking for advice. International organizations are on you, like you are an expert, he says. But ideally you should have become our announcer, or like who reads out loud messages, he said. So it's like it's not me to become the person who speaks on behalf of them, but it's them who should speak, and we should give the tools and all of the instruments to them to speak so that they could speak. And this was one of the dangers of my fieldwork, because I eventually started writing extensively about problems persons with the disabled people face in Tashkent, and many people were asking me to write something about their problems in the media. And I said, okay, I can do it, but let's write it together. And the solution was to have them as co-authors or co-researchers and co-activists. So it's not only me who is coming to the stage and saying that we should solve this and these problems. And I'm still working with several friends of mine who are also becoming co-authors. And this is an interesting solution, building partnerships with disabled people and their organizations. So this is basically the two challenges, main challenges that I'm facing. Yeah, thank you.
Dilmurad, so much. I think what you said probably resonates with many people here, and hope we have a chance to discuss it more later. Anya?
Hello, everyone. Natalia, Magda, thank you for the invitation. I will describe myself. I'm a woman. I'm 33 years old. I wear circle glasses and beige sweater. I'm at my apartment in Lviv. This is west part of Ukraine. Behind me, white wall with kitchen stuff. Natalia introduced me a little bit, but I just want to add that after the full-scale Russian invasion to Ukraine, I expanded my study a little bit, and now I'm focused more to the experiences of people with disabilities in Ukraine during the war, particularly with intellectual disabilities. And I will talk more about methodological challenges during my research after the full-scale invasion. In the state of my stress and stress of my narrators, dangers and challenges that the war brings, I thought a lot about how to start this research ethically correctly and methodologically correctly. First of all, I thought about the security. The interviewer, me, and my narrators must be in the safe environment. First of all, I choose the buildings with shelter. Also, when the air alarm had started, we just stopped our conversation and went to the shelter. And the data provided by my narrators must be used ethically in the safe manner, or the information provided has not harmed a person or their relatives. And therefore, the secondly challenge and important point, do not harm a person. Talking about traumatic events, especially during their experiences, can be re-traumatized for both me as a narrator and also as an interviewee, and also my narrator, and maybe Marcin will talk more about this re-traumatized experiences in his research too. Therefore, I adapted two strategies to my research: observe and listen. I began my research by keeping diaries of my volunteering work. I used to evacuate people with disabilities to the Ukrainian-Polish border, and also I looked for accessible shelters for them in Lviv and Lviv region. Also, I collecting and analyzed posts and photos from social networks of civil organization of people with intellectual disabilities. And in the late of spring 2022, I began collecting interviews with people with intellectual disabilities, but not only with intellectual, and with their caregivers, mostly parents. My narrators were people I knew before the full-scale invasion, with whom I have trustful relationships, and it's important when we talk about the war and war experiences. And also the people with intellectual disabilities with whom I had interviews or any relationships during my research use verbal language and live in a community. That is, my research doesn't include people with complex intellectual disabilities, people who don't use verbal language, and who lived in closed institutions. Interviewing people with intellectual disabilities involves to use easy language, to use a small number of questions. If the condition allows, I usually use narrative interview with them. Also, we paused our interviews sometimes and switching attention to other topics if my narrators really need it. While interviewing about the experiences of the war, it became clear to me that people with intellectual disabilities lack accessible information about the events that are taking place. Therefore, it becomes more difficult to fully assess one's experience. Risk and challenges of the war raise them not because of their disability, but because of unavailability of information. To better understand the everyday life of people with intellectual disabilities, as I told before, I interview their caregivers. At some point, maybe after the 6 or 8 months after the full-scale invasion, I felt an anxiety I try to talk more about psychologists. Also, my narrators had this opportunity to talk with psychologists about their experiences. And at that time, I stopped interviewing. I have started to think how to use another approaches to study the experiences of people with disabilities during the war. Actually, right now, I add more methods. I have started to be a volunteer in the assistant house in Lviv as a volunteer, and also I take a place in the integrate theater with people with intellectual disabilities, and I will talk a little bit about these experiences with theater because it's a new one for me, but it's very important when we talk about trauma experiences to use this dramatic approach. As I observe, participation in the theater allows participants, this is people with intellectual disabilities and people without disabilities, to reflect on their experiences in different way, verbally, boldly. We use images and sounds for it, and sometimes it's much more easier. Sometimes it's not to talk about it during the interview. And also the goal of the theater to socialize people with intellectual disabilities, and it's very important to go deeply for the daily lives of people with disabilities too. With this interaction during the theater, tea parties and conversation in between, it allows me to methodologically deepen to the results of my research, to better understand the social reality faced by people with intellectual disability during the war, and I hope I will prepare some article about this soon. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Anya. And let's move on to our last speaker, Magda.
Thank you so much. Thank you for your presentations, Marcin, Anya, and Dilmurad. I'm really happy that we are having this conversation. Okay, so I would like to talk a little bit about my experience, my research experience. I'm currently conducting a research project that is devoted to the history of deaf amateur film movement in Poland. So I will concentrate on this intersection of deaf studies and film studies in this context. So I would like to mention three main challenges that I face. The first one is the lack of activity of collecting and archiving deaf and, in broader sense, also disability heritage. And these artworks, cultural texts are not collected or archived in any systematic way, and because they are basically not recognized as a valuable cultural heritage that is worth collecting and protecting. And it is, to my opinion, also not considered a part of like wider than the community, like national heritage, tradition, cultural, social, or political ancestry. And the consequence of this is it's not that these artworks, in my case, the films made by the deaf filmmakers, they are not collected or archived at all. They are by the bottom-up, I would call them citizen archivists that are filmmakers themselves very, very often. And the consequence of this is that those archives, so to say, those collections of the films, the material that I'm working with, are very much scattered around the country, and so basically, and they are like held by people who do the work of collecting the films, digitizing them, and they just keep them on their computers, for example, or hard disks. So it has some consequences as well, which are quite troubling. On one hand, it forces the researcher to use ethnographical methods, which is not a bad thing, of course, but to have access to the sources, you have to have access to the community and have already established contact with the community, because these are the filmmakers that they share with you the sources that they have. And they collect the films of other filmmakers and all the photographs made by other deaf creators. And it is amazing when you have access to this private archive, but on the other hand, those materials are digitized without any copyright in mind. So it is extremely difficult to, for example, use them in your research, in the publication. So that's a massive problem that I actually face. The second problem that I would like to mention is something that is called methodological nationalism, and that's the term coined by Andreas Wimmer and Nina Glick-Schiller in their joint article Methodological Nationalism and the Study of Migration, that was published in 2002. And they define this methodological nationalism as intellectual tendency of scholars to assume that the nation state is a natural social, political, but also cultural form, and that phenomena within the nation states are self-evident. Therefore, they take for granted the research and the results of the work, and they extrapolate it to other contexts, to other countries. So from my perspective, that is the problem, or like where I am somehow in between this Anglo-Saxon perspective that has this powerful dissemination tool which is the English language, but also very attractive theoretical frames. So that's on one hand, and on the other is this post-Soviet perspective that is taken for granted when discussing Eastern European issues in general, but it also reflects to disability studies and deaf studies. And the third thing that I would like to mention briefly is from the film studies perspective, is that in film studies we are very often trained to analyze films as works of art. That's our toolkit that we have to analyze it from like author perspective, genre, or aesthetics. But these films, the deaf amateur films, are very often not. They're not the best material to. Or the other way around. These tools that I have are not the best for this type of material. So these films are quite often hard to love, or I would say, and hard to enjoy. So that's a third challenge that I would have. Thank you so much. Thank you, Natalia.
Thank you, Magda. Thank you all. I was making all of those notes while you were speaking, and it's sort of pretty difficult to synthesize everything you have said. I will just speak very briefly, and then I will, open the floor for discussion and comments and questions. It just seems to me that in many ways, what you were saying, all of you, is that disability studies or thinking of disability in your research requires finding really new ways of designing research. And the question is, how do you do this? How do you design new research, given that we are, based or in Eastern Europe or doing research on Eastern Europe, and Eastern Europe is, thought usually or oftentimes via the lens of Russia or, Soviet legacy. And given that most of researchers in Eastern Europe probably use English and rely on, Anglo-Saxon ideas, but then also, one of the problems is some of the problems that both Magda and Marcin spoke about is that a researcher becomes an archivist and is not only really researching historical record, but is creating a historical record, really. This is as much about researching as about creating actually records and finding those records and naming and even saying what is a record in this case, what is even a legacy in this case. And then things that Dilmurad and Anya talked about is who's a researcher, and actually how important it is that the role of the researcher is to make society recognize that actually disabled people are the, main producers of disability knowledge. That this is the sort of negotiator point or mediator in many ways. How do you mediate this? That as at least in Dilmurad's narrative, it's a non-disabled researcher trying to educate society that disabled knowledge should be produced mostly by people with disabilities or in cooperation, right? But this sort of mediating role, and then of course, how do you do research under extremely difficult circumstances, which are not, unfortunately, limited to Ukraine, but war circumstances are, familiar to too many people in the world. And then how do you work with vulnerable populations without further maybe subjecting them to difficult experiences and also, over interpreting their voices. So this is where I will stop. I have many notes and I'm still thinking through it, but I'm sure that many of you would like to jump in. And if you have any questions that you would like to, ask our four speakers, or maybe you have your own disability research experiences that you want to share, your own questions, then all of those questions, comments are very much welcome. And we have more or less 25 minutes. So hopefully many of you will join. You can also type, of course, a question or a comment in a type box if your mic doesn't work. Of course, our four speakers are also welcome to, comment and discuss or reply or develop if there's something you...
Maybe I will add something because I catch your point about making disability knowledge by people with disabilities. As you mentioned before, just in October was published the book History Not Without Us, the history of the movement for the rights of people with disabilities in Ukraine. And actually, I collected interviews for this book and write the half of this book. And what actually I can conclude that people with disabilities in Ukraine, for example, in Ukraine, also create this base of independency of Ukraine, because the first organization of people with disabilities was created in the late 1980s in the Soviet period, and the first point they talk, we don't need the politics of disability that really exist in Soviet time. We understood that people with disabilities have rights, and we will be fighting for it. And the first point, we need the independent Ukraine, and they most of them involved to the movement for the independence of Ukraine. And what I see now during the Orange Revolution, the Revolution of Dignity, during the full-scale invasion, people with disability are really involved to this movement. And also part of them are in the served in the army. Exactly, let us say people with disability cannot serve in army, but they do like volunteers, you know, and for example, Magda, I interviewed Ruslan Rubanov. He is deaf volunteer, and also he created movies. And now he collected videos from the front line and he wants to create a movie about the Russian-Ukrainian war. If you need any contacts, I can share. Yeah, that's all.
Thank you, Anya. Arceli put in the chat box some further recommendations. Thank you so much. And I think Anna said that she had a comment. Would you like to type it or would you like to ask it via
Well, I
your
think
mic?
it's going to be a little bit faster if I speak it.
Okay.
So I come to disability studies from a slightly surprising angle because I research Shakespeare and early modern drama, and because that's my primary field. When I started working on such figures as Caliban, I just got in touch with my colleagues who do disability studies in early modern era, basically. And then I started to kind of think in terms of Shakespeare in performance and how representations of disability work there. So that led me to basically to Shakespeare and disability in East Central Europe. And I'm kind of new to the field in the sense that I've been doing a lot of reading, but I have a very similar quandrum to the other speakers in this session, which is to what extent we can use methodology which is rooted in the cultural and language experience of the Anglo-centric world and apply it here unconditionally, because this is an act of self-colonization, which I think that we are nowadays we are becoming very aware of it. So it is just a comment because I don't have an answer. I mean, a ready answer how to go around it. But at the same time, what I discovered when working on specifically that there is a figure in Shakespeare called Caliban that is read through post-colonialist lens in Western theatre. And in Poland, the disability trope was there, but also what I discovered kind of for myself, and I think that it's nothing new to you, was that the ethnocentric attitudes prevalent in this region, they are very disability based in the sense that I found it impossible to discuss disability without intersectionality. That to discuss Jewishness, because I was working on Jewish productions in Yiddish, I discovered the able nationalist perspective. I mean, I discovered for myself that the nationalist perspective presented by the hegemonic discourse of many of the, writers in pre-war, but also post-war Poland was ableist at the same time. So that's it. That's my comment.
Thank you so much. I think so many of us, I mean, it resonates with many of us who are not working on Shakespeare yet. How do you translate the tools into the Polish or more broadly Eastern European concept, how do you redefine them? How do you tweak them? And they are so attractive, right? And so compelling. Lily Hammer, I think, already had to leave, but she left a comment. She said that she relates so much to many of your works as a researcher doing fieldwork in the area of disability art in Israel and the US. I wrote about the concept of multisensory ethnography in the context of critical blindness studies. I actually read this book some time ago. It's about, she really uses the concept of intersectionality that Anna just mentioned, and it's a book about blind women's experiences in Israel in a very interesting context. It also thinks of eugenics and neo-eugenics in Israel. There's one more new message. Yes, Magda says if there's still time, I would like to ask a question. Definitely go for it. We have still like 15 minutes or so. So if anyone else is thinking whether there is time, yes, there is time.
I have a question or also comment to Magda. She said that she's working with films, like she trying to get those films through the deaf community. I have research about representation about image of disabled person in Russian culture, and I have not very similar, but also problem like how to find the. So I'm analyzing the like movies and television program, and for me it was problem like how to find those movies, because she's analyzing movie and searching it through the community, but I'm just analyzing through the channels and through the cinema. So the community is not very helpful in this case, because very often they do not know movies about disability, or they know only foreign movies. So maybe somebody have some advices, because of course I Googled, I tried to find other scholars, and I'm already like in the last chapter of my PhD, but the problem, like all what I found, it was just Google, and I do not know good resources where, if you are researching movies and television, like where to find the sources on it. It just forums, chats, Googling, and that's all. I don't know, maybe somebody had similar problems or know some good resources.
Thank you, Alina. If anyone has an answer to this question, please type it in the chat box, or I guess we can also help to exchange email addresses afterwards. We have 3 people who raised their hands. So it's Arseli, Magda, and then Dilmurad. So please go ahead.
Yes, thank you everyone for sharing your experiences and really honest discussion, which I truly appreciate. These are challenges we always face, and how do you really tackle them rather than pretending to feel like they don't exist. And also I sense among all the participants this sense of ethical relation to the work, like how do you go about that? I think mine is more like a comment / question, which is something I'm grappling myself, and I think can be also a broader question for disability studies too, like the place of intellectual disability within disability studies, and what kind of ethical challenges, as we also heard from Hanna, that intellectual disability and cognitive disabilities present to doing disability studies work. And I'm here thinking alongside like Margaret Price's work, where she writes in Med School of like actually there is this sense that, you know, we always expect a rhetorically able interviewee or a participant, you know, where you're able to tell your experiences. But what happens when your interviewees are not like rhetorically able and tell the stories, which very much also relates to Marcin's work about how do you do oral history with intellectually disabled people for whom that history may not be easily narratable, may not have a very linear chronological timeline, or what if people have brain fog, and what kind of a story they tell, and how do you then make room for such different expressions of the history or one's experiences of war, which I think is like a challenging question that for us to think about, even also in my work, like what about activist affordances for intellectually disabled people? So I wonder if you had any comments on that, and how methods could be crafted differently, which I was also like mentioning one of my MA students' work, like how can we bring disability as a critical lens into the methods we do, so that they can be rethought with disability in mind, to make room for these experiences that are not normally recognized in traditional methods, be it interview or oral history or ethnography, what have you. So that was my comment. And I had another thing, but I'm forgetting it right now, but I'll leave it there. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Arceli. Magda?
Sorry, I have no way to turn on my webcam, but it was great seeing you all, and thanks for your interventions. I don't know if it's a comment or a question. I just want to share a thought with you. That is, thinking about methodology and disability studies identity as a discipline. I'm just wondering, to what an extent are we making linkages between methodology, ethics, and our accountability as able or non-able researchers on various, stages of what methodology entails? Because we were talking about, collecting the data in various contexts, analysis, but there's also this phase of dissemination and taking credit for it. So I'm just thinking about, to what an extent methodology should also focus on that last stage. Dilmurad, you mentioned a little bit about co-authoring and highlighting disabled people's names when you present papers and etc. That's one of the ways. But I'm also thinking about, we would like to challenge the Anglo-Saxon methodology or ableist methodologies, but to what an extent are we using our interactions and knowledge making of people with disabilities whom we, for instance, interview? To what an extent do their knowledge making inform our methodology practices? Because we are already at the stage where we, yes, agree that people with disabilities should be treated as experts in a certain topic or knowledge makers, but I'm not really certain that we already treat members of this community, and I'm one of them, let's say, members of the community, that we don't really see a value yet in us being not maybe knowledgeable, but having insights as to how the methodological process could take place. So my question is to all the presenters, do you have an idea of how it could be done, or maybe you've tried doing something like that in relationship to shaping methodology process? Thanks.
Thank you, Magda. That's a great and huge question. We will have Dilmurad now, and maybe then we will still have actually a few minutes left. Maybe some of the speakers today, Marcin, Anya, Magda, and Dilmurad will want to tackle the question. Okay, so Dilmurad, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you very much. I actually forgot about one more challenge when I was listening to all of the experiences, research experiences from colleagues. For example, Magda is doing research with deaf people, and Anya is doing with persons with intellectual disabilities. And we always choose with whom we can do research. And I can clearly see that some researchers, they have specific preference in doing research with some type of disabilities, and I don't know what are the choices behind this, and then why did they make this decision. But in my research, I tried to be more cross-visibility, but due to the legacies of the Soviet times, we have now separate communities of deaf people, blind people, and they are not in one place, so because they live in specific communities. And this was a challenge, a methodological challenge of what kind of methods you use with different groups of people. And are these methods suitable with, for example, with blind and visually impaired people? I couldn't use participatory video, for example. I mean, we could have used, but I made decisions based on these legacies and types of disabilities. And this is the challenge of doing cross-disability research. How do you combine all types of disabilities into one? I mean, can you do that? I think it's really challenging to do that. This was one of the thoughts that came up to me. Yeah, thank you.
Dilmurad. Would anyone want to answer or address Magda Sharota's question or comment? You know, any of the four speakers, but maybe anyone else. You know, what it made me actually think, what Magda said, is that this is actually this opening. This is actually this idea of accountability and taking credit of research and then dissemination of its research. This is sort of where disability studies really destabilizes those traditional fields. It's not only disability studies, it's probably also all kinds of studies which involve marginalized, disfranchised groups, right, that researchers sort of work with and write about and analyze. So maybe it's not specific to only disability studies, but still but since it is such a marginalized, disfranchised group, this is sort of this opening where disability studies challenges really all kinds of traditional methodologies and destabilizes the figure, the authority of the scholar. But would anyone want to address this or answer?
I believe we touched here already really big issues like Marcin at the beginning, Dilmurad, and of course Magda. What I think about the Magda question or comment is, yeah, I was thinking about you know, of course, anthropology and ethnology, and also Polish one, to be honest. Probably some of you know Tomasz Rakowski, which is, you know, who is doing his research in this underprivileged region of Mazovia, and he coined a term of Broniowska sociological thought, which is, you know, which is treating this vernacular understandings of local circumstances and situation as a piece of knowledge, as a normal one, as an academic one, yeah? Which was very inspiring for me, by the way. And I would like to comment Arsenic question and comment about storytelling of people with the intellectual disabilities, because it's, you know, it's quite important for me, because it's a matter of storytelling as a way of understanding, but also approaching not only past but present only. Yeah? I'm only referring to Hanna's work, which is crucial, which is very important, and your approach. I love approach, and you know how we approach a vulnerability and creating a safe space, which is, you know, something not quite but very different. But I was thinking about creating a safe space Yeah, it's you know so as I guess it's even not this is the strain of oral history also, which is not actually about reconstructing facts, but it's also about just giving voice to the voiceless. Yeah, it's quite simple as that. So it's just I have no solution, but I have an impression that it's even far more important than what I talk about. So this reconstructive dimension. I don't know if it's clear, but I try to.
I want to add just 2 words also to the comment and question of Ursula about how to interviewing people with intellectual disability, especially how to use oral history. But Marcin added something. By the way, I had really a very big ethical question 3 years ago. I want to interview some men with intellectual disability in the community organization which provide daily support for people with intellectual disability. I used to be volunteer there, and he was ready to it. But in Ukraine, we have 3 groups of disabilities. I think in Uzbekistan is the same system. The first group of disability is the most difficult group, and some people with disabilities or their relatives really want to have this group because the pensions are higher for a first group of disability. And this man has or had, I don't know, this first group of disability, and he has it's in Ukrainian недієздатність, it's inability status. And all of documents, official signatures for him doing his caregivers. Actually, I had really long conversation with his caregivers about informal consent and how I will be used the information that my narrator will provide me. And the caregivers really wanted to listen the interview, and I understood that I can't share the record with a caregiver, and also my narrator really didn't want that I will do it. But actually I negotiated with caregivers, and I'm in general retold about the interview, which question I used. I share the questionnaire with caregivers, that's all. But it's a big question how to do legally the informal consent with people who have the status of inability. In Ukraine we have this. I don't know, maybe in your countries we don't have this, but in Ukraine it's a big legal question. Thank you.
Thank you. It's it's a little bit past 5:30, so we will be closing soon. However, maybe there are some last comments, questions, things that you would like to address before we end. Magda, go
ahead. Thank you, Magda Sharota, for your comment and for bringing this issue. And that's the thing that is somehow always in the back of your head, how to make how to pay credit to people that you well, use the knowledge and experience. And it is not only in disability studies, it is like an element of like ethical ethnographical research always, that somehow you are as a researcher and person who like makes living of this knowledge, how you like pay back to the community. And so thank you for bringing this issue. And I was wondering how to answer this this call that you asked. Yeah, but well, I think in my case it can be like using sign language that is somehow influencing methodology, because it is a different way of like perceiving reality, creativity. So that may be an answer. I'm still wondering how to use these terms from the sign language, from the Polish sign language, like as an analytical tool. In my research, by names and the experiences of these people as artists, basically, can be also treated as this paying credit. Not only like speaking about them as experts in providing me knowledge about their deafness, but also as like creators of a like valid heritage and valid artworks. Yeah, so that would be my take on it. Thank you.
You. I don't see anyone else raising their hands or typing in the chat box. Or if I'm missing anything, please let me know. I mean, I don't really have any sort of neat summary. There's no way we can summarize such a dense and rich discussion. And I feel that this is really only the beginning or inauguration of a bigger conversation that I think that we as researchers in the field should have. And maybe the conference that Marcin and that both Marcin and Magda talked about in the very beginning, which will take place in Kraków in 2024 in May, as far as I remember, that could be a great place to continue this conversation. Oh, I see Alina. Okay, so I will so Alina will be the last person speaking, and then we will end. Alina?
Yeah, I just started to think there was many words about like scholar and people with disability. Like people with disability is really those who have the knowledge, they are experts. But I very often have such concern, like I'm a person with disability. I have SMA, I am using wheelchair all my life, and I'm writing work about disability. Like I shouldn't express my own knowledge as expert. But at the same time, if we are saying, and everywhere it's like people with disability are experts in this area, like I do not know, like do other scholars have such problems or thoughts or again advices? Like I'm trying to be neutral on this topic, but at the same time I understand that I have right to express my knowledge, but I should be neutral because I'm a scholar. I don't know, maybe somebody have the same issues.
Is there anyone who would like to address Alina's comment? Oh, Magda.
Yeah, maybe very, very quickly, maybe not to the point so much, but my maybe similar problem with doing research in deaf community is that deafness is like programmed to be very, very the capital D deafness, very ableist in a way that the deaf community positions itself as non-disabled, which has its like political usage, I would say, because they want to present themselves as a cultural and linguistic minority. But for example, for me as a researcher, it is quite difficult to stay calm when these very ableist attitudes are being like fired just to justify this capital D deafness, deaf identity. So maybe that's something that resonates with what you said, Alina.
Good point, thank you.
I also just wanted to add a few words. Alina, I think you cannot be neutral, and we all cannot be neutral in some sense, because we live in a very complex world, and your expertise lies in your, I think, in your living experience of disability rather than, so it's not like an expertise. I mean, this is a very challenging also, who is an expert? So I think it deserves a separate seminar on it, and should be continued. Thank you.
Okay, so this is an idea to the organizers of this platform to organize a seminar on this topic in 2024. And I don't see anyone else who's raising their hand or writing in the chat box. So thank you so much for this conversation, which I think, which I have a feeling that it only opened up some new avenues for thought rather than summarized anything. But it was also really fascinating to hear to all the 4 speakers' experiences. Thank you so much for preparing and sharing your observations, your experiences, your doubts, and your questions with you. With us, I think it's really important to hear and learn how other people, struggle, or what kind of questions they ask themselves when they do this work. So, thank you all very much. Have a great evening, those of you who are, in Eastern Europe or in Europe, and have a great day, those of you who are in a different time zones, and hope to see you some other time.
Thanks. All the
Thank
best.
you so much.
Bye.
Bye. And thank you,
care.
Natalia, for chairing this discussion so nicely. Thank you.